Hi Pussycats, it's your girl Ronnie here with another episode of Pussycat Nation. Before we get started, I would like to thank you for viewing my channel. Please follow me on Instagram, RonnieBond0515, and Twitter, RonnieBond0515. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't like the video, thumbs down. Remember to hit the notification button for each time I post, and subscribe if you like. And remember that positive and negative comments are always welcome. Today I'm going to do something a little different. A couple of weeks ago, I asked my followers on Instagram if I should read a book or not. I wanted to get 50 yeses, but I only got 25. So today I'm going to read this book called A Hidden Heir to Redeem Him. It's from Harlequin Romances. Normally I don't read books like this because they tend to be a bit too mushy for me, but now, I don't know, since we're kind of still in quarantine and it's still not really kind of safe for you pussycats to be going out there, having woo-woo with, Tom, Dick, Harry, Sue, Mary, Jane, Mercedes, Portia, Hanifa, Shaquan, and Laquita. So I'm going to read the book. I just want to ask a question. How many of you have the quarantine started in March? This is now August 31st, so September is just upon us. It's almost been 6 months. How many of you have picked up a book since, quarantine and COVID and the protests and the movement and everything started? Let me see. Wow, that many of you picked up a book since quarantine started. That's terrible. I tell you, that's terrible. Don't you know that reading is fundamental? And the best way to exercise your mind is through a book. I know you senior and adult pussycats probably don't want to hear this, but yes, I'm going to read this. It's by Harlequin Romance, and it's called A Hidden Heir to Redeem Him by Dani Collins. So this is the book that I'm going to start to read. I know you're so excited to hear my voice, right? So this is, I guess this is like the introduction. You know how when you open up that first page and you see it? Okay. It says, Kiara was financially equipped to meet the needs of Val's child. Nothing in his life had to change. In fact, his mother would become Kiara's problem. The solution was elegantly simple and utterly freeing. I don't know what that means, but okay. Yet, he remained where he was, coldly enraged. His insides were gripped by a wrath that swelled his chest with the pressure of a primal yell he couldn't release. He could hardly pick apart why his provoked such a volcanic rise of fury in him. It had something to do with the grotesque display of history. While he'd been married to Tina, Kiara had been having his child, sentencing an innocent to the label he'd worn like a dead albatross until he was old enough to make damn sure he deserved the slur. No, He might not have crafted himself into the most upstanding of men, but he was decent enough to pluck a child out of a toxic spill before she was lethally poisoned and scarred forever. Refused that money, he told Kiara. My daughter will inherit my fortune, not his. A minute ago, you didn't want to know her name. She can have mine. He shot back. You're going to marry me today. So that's like the introduction of the story. That word, albatross, I have no idea what it means. So at some point, or when I read the second chapter, then the next segment, I'll probably have the definition for you, because I have no idea what it means. But that's the opening. You know, when you open up the book and it tells you, I'll give you a briefing what it's like. I know is, it's a man and it's a woman. He was married and he probably had an affair or something. And I don't know, a kid came out of it. That's you pussycats to be out there, you know, testing the waters with your mistresses and your misters without protection. I don't know. So I'm about to read it. A Hidden Heir to Redeem Her. Chapter 1. I hope this book is juicy, don't you? I really do. I hope it's juicy. Okay, here we go. Valentino Casal had long ago hardened himself against useless things like feelings, but he found himself irritated by the congested streets of Athens. Traffic was his driver's problem. Not his, but he shifted restlessly, acknowledging the real pea beneath his mattress. Returning to Greece grated on him. Being sent here as a child had always felt like a punishment, and still did. And to be thrust into space between his father's money and his mother's grappling for it. That was the equivalent of being thrown into a cage with a hungry tiger. So no, he was not pleased to be here. This will be the last time, he assured himself with a grim look at the bustling mid-morning streets. At least his father wasn't here. There was a silver lining. If he had feelings, Val supposed he would be experiencing grief, or what some call closure. Since receiving the news that Nicola Milona had died 2 days ago, however, he had experienced no emotions at all, not even relief. His father would be cremated and his ashes interred on his island property. In lieu of a service that no one would attend, Nikolai's 2 sons and their mothers were requested to appear in person at the reading of the will. Val had rejected any share of his father's wealth 2 decades ago. He built his own fortune off his own oil-backed grazi. He had even supplied his mother with a healthy allowance in hopes she would quit lusting after Nico's money. Not that it had worked. She had continued to take Nico's occasional checks and remained convinced that her son was entitled to all of his father's fortune. If she absolutely had to, she would settle for his receiving exactly 50%. Val still didn't want it, as he had reiterated to his father's lawyer when the man had called to set up the meeting. Whatever he stood to inherit could be signed over to his mother if it couldn't be refused. There were stipulations. He had been informed that demanded the presence of all parties before anything could proceed. The king was dead, but his legacy of manipulation lived on. And yes, Val's mother was mentioned, the lawyer had hurried to state. so it was in Val's interest to show up and keep the wheels turning. Who cared where the money went? Evelina Casal, that was who. She cared about Nico's money above all things. She most especially cared how much she would receive as compared to Nico's ex-wife, Paloma. If the other woman was bequeathed so much as 1 year or more, well, Val supposed he would finally meet his half-brother with pistols at dawn. Another silver lining. Stop, he commanded, lifting his head off the back of his seat as the gaze caught the frontage of the art gallery. Let me out of here. As he stepped from the car, his phone dinged with another text from his mother, informing him she had arrived in the lobby. She could wait. They all could. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and crossed the street. Habit propelled him. For 3 years he had been entering every gallery he glimpsed, no matter what else was on his agenda. No matter if he'd been in the same shop days before. Perversely, he was forever on the hunt for his own naked form and was always disappointed not to find it. It didn't escape him that if he had wanted to embarrass his father with public news, he could have taken a photo down his drawers and posted it online years ago. Hell, in his heyday, Val modeled underwear so sheer and tight he might as well have been bare-assed. So as Barb in such an act was long lost. At this point, an unknown artist capitalizing on his notoriety by circulating a classy rendition of his junk was pure, pretentious vanity, which he was probably guilty of along with a multitude of other sins. Alright, this family already seems like they have a lot of issues that goes deep within. Alas, today was one more fruitless search. He smirked at his own joke, but his humor was quickly overshadowed by aggravation. He ought to be pleased when he failed to find himself. Everyone used to use him to whatever extent they could. In this case, he had blatantly given his permission to be exploited, but this one struggling artist hadn't done so. Why not? It could have been a break she needed. As 3 years passed, however, he failed to glimpse anything like her work again. A niggling concern had begun whirling in him that something had happened to her. Why that might bother him, he couldn't fathom. His own father had died, and he had continued with the tennis game his mother's call with the news had interrupted. There had been something about that young artist, though. She'd been both mature and self-reliant, yet naive. Charmingly open with her opinions and genuinely curious of his, unafraid to challenge his assumptions or have her own views picked apart. She hadn't taken anything from him either, not even the money he'd left for the sketch he ripped from her book and tucked into his briefcase so he wouldn't lose or crumble it. His phone buzzed again. His mother was worried she might run into Paloma or Javiero before Val arrived. As if Val would allow them to hurry him along, he didn't respond, only moved leisurely through the gallery, skimming his gaze across landscapes and abstracts, cats and fruit bowls, and a view through a window that bore only the vaguest resemblance to the framed sketch hanging in his bathroom. The execution of this one wasn't nearly as skilled, and the signature was not the knockout he sought. One of these days he would go to Ireland and poke around their galleries, see if he was hanging out there. He smirked again at his double extender, but his glimmer of amusement fell away as he walked the final few blocks through blistering heat into the ninth circle of hell, otherwise known as the Mylona's office tower. He hadn't been here since. Well, it must have been right before he flown to Venice 3 years ago, acting on social media posts that his father's rival was vacationing there. Val wondered yet again whether he might have backed out of his ill-fated marriage if he come back to his hotel room after that initial meeting and found his unassuming artist still in his bed, rather than finding all the cash he had in his wallet still in its tidy stack on a night table, her and her sketchbook gone. She'd been guileless and refreshingly oblivious to his position and money. He'd been utterly relaxed as she sketched him. It seemed ridiculous to say he had felt safe. He was a powerful man with strength and position and money, really at a disadvantage, but it had been a surprising relief that he hadn't felt the need to keep his guard up with her. It sounds interesting. It's kind of, catching my attention there. Okay, let me go back. He hadn't fully appreciated that until months later, and to this day he was annoyed with himself that he left her that morning, giving her a chance to disappear without a trace. He hadn't caught her last name, and with his father's ultimatum still ringing in his ears, he'd gone through with his plan to firmly divest of the old man once and for all. Oh, divest. That ruthless move had been the last time he'd allowed emotion to drive him. The marry in haste cliché had its roots in truth. He found no satisfaction in his marriage, only a sexless existence with a woman whose interests were not his own. At least the divorce was finalized, and he could turn the page on that chapter in his encyclopedia collection of sordid mistakes. "Take your time," his mother said as he came through the revolving doors. She gave him a dismayed once over. "Would a suit have killed you?" "A suit would have implied this meeting was important to me." She tissed and moved toward him from the waiting area, almost as tall as he was, and still catwalked in at 58. Though she would slay anyone who tried to claim she was a day over 51. Of course, that would have made her pregnant at 18, when she'd been gracing the cover of Swanson issues. She reserved her math skills for counting calories and money. "Good afternoon, Mr. Castle. I'm Nigel," one of his father's minions said. "Might I escort you to the meeting room?" He waved them toward the bank of elevators. Val turned and a mega jolt of electricity shot through him as he was smacked in the eyes by the large oil behind the security desk. "Where did that come from?" he demanded. It hadn't been there 3 days ago. He had never seen it before in his life. The seascape framed by a window was unfamiliar, although the view itself had to be greased. The blend of colors was new to his eyes, but they were gloriously understated while providing infinite texture and depth. Something in the composition was deeply familiar to him, too. The waft of the curtain in the breeze was reminiscent of the drape of a charcoal shirt over the back of a chair. The painting was so bizarrely evocative of her. She might as well have stood next to him, whispering in his ear, telling him that she felt safe in here. But the wildness beyond called to her. This painting was a threshold of sorts as she contemplated moving into a new world filled with uncertainty, but also with the vast and glorious new experiences. "You can't come back here, sir." He brushed past the security guard and examined the signature. Not the K.O. on his own sketch, but Kiera. His skin tightened all over his body. So I'm assuming this Kiera lady, the artist that left this picture at the desk, is the woman we read about in the beginning that he had an affair with. Where did you get this? I want to speak to this artist. He didn't ask himself why, but when, the security guard only gave a baffled shrug. Val wanted to punch him. Sir, Nigel the minion offered a perplexed look. "Ms. O'Neill is upstairs. She arrived for your meeting 10 minutes ago." "For the reading of my father's will?" His scalp prickled. The sensation kept going, lifting a sharp tingle along the sides of his neck and running the length of his spine. His gut knotted in his growing twitch. His skin felt too tight for the heat that was suddenly pressurizing inside him, crystallizing the carbon in his body tissue to diamond hardness. "Who is she?" his mother asked at a distance. Val barely heard her over his harsh laugh of outraged gallows humor. "Someone who worked for Dad." How had he missed that? Blinded by his own libido, he supposed. Cursing himself, he said, "Yes, by all means, take me to her. I can't wait." Is it going to be some drama out there? We'll see. Kiera O'Neill could tell that Nico's lawyer, Davin, was trying to put her at ease with his insistent small talk. But it wasn't working. Maybe he thought he was charming her. They'd met several times in the past 3 years, and he had invited her to dinner more than once. But her priorities were always her daughter and her art, in that order. If she squeezed in evening of wine and rom-com with her best friend Scarlett, she considered her life complete. Trying to fit a man into her narrow world will only complicate her to-do list. Besides, the last time she gone on a date, she wound up pregnant. What did I say when I first read the thing? And the man in question would enter this boardroom any second. Her whole body was soaked in a clammy sweat, her mind incapable of holding a sensible thought, let alone a conversation. Her belted dress and flowing Camino jacket, chosen so carefully to be unobtrusive and comfortable while offering an impression of quiet confidence, felt constrictive. Her unsettled stomach was full of snakes, and the feminist inside her, who had happily told men to talk to her hand for 3 years, was wringing said hands like an adolescent girl when the grad ball was announced. The cute boy was coming down the corridor, and she didn't know if she wanted him to notice her or not. She kept thinking she should have done something different with her hair. Straighten it, maybe. She should have worn some more makeup to disguise her apprehension, or maybe not so much. So she didn't look so polished. Nico had liked her to look and sound and act a certain way, and she'd gone along with it because, reasons, but this wasn't who she was. Deep down, she was still a mixed-race orphan from Cork's dodgiest neighborhood. Scarlett would point out she was actually a mother and an artist, but Kiera was faking her way through both of those things, so she wasn't sure they counted. Val Castle had seemed like a smart man. She suspected he would see straight through to the fraud she was, no matter how she presented herself. Although he had seemed to think her work had genuine merit, when she had demurred, he said, "You really don't know who I am, do you?" She hadn't, not until much later. It was all coming home to roost now, though. She concentrated on not licking the lipstick off her mouth. Her throat was dry, making it impossible to swallow. All morning her heart rate had been picking up to a panic speed, then petering out in a cold flush, leaving her lightheaded and vaguely exhausted. Excuse me. She worried she would faint any second and reminded herself yet again to breathe. She didn't want to be stoked out on the floor when Val walked in. She wanted to text Scarlett to hurry back from the ladies' room, but she had already set her phone to silent and tucked it into her clutch. Pulling it out mid-conversation would be rude. With a stiff smile she fought to keep in place, she waited for Davin to pause in his rattling on, planning to say something about checking on Scarlett. Scarlett was heavily pregnant. It wasn't strange that she pretty much lived in the ladies' room these days, but she was taking a long time. Had she bumped into some of their guests? Was today's meeting taking place out there without her? Had Val already heard the news and walked away before he laid eyes on her? He offered her a chance to explain, giving everything she heard about him, since that was probably for the best, but her heart twisted in anguish on behalf of. The door opened and the air changed in a subtle rush. A thirst of tense energy came in with the three people who entered. "Signora and Signora Casal," Nigel announced, glancing at the tablet as it dinged. "The other party has arrived. I'll return with them shortly." He melted away, closing the door. Dalvin, Val's mother, Evelina, I don't know, Evelina sounded as frosty and cultured as she had the one time Kiera had spoken to her 3 years ago. In person, Evelina was the epitome of what fashion magazines deemed sexy and attractive, nearly 6 foot and wispy. She had ivory skin and lustrous brunette hair that shimmered as she floated down the far side of the table. Her clothes were designer. Her neck and ears and fingers were decked in glittering jewels. She greeted Davin with perfunctory air kisses. Oh, that's that mess. I wouldn't have known that's what that word meant. I wouldn't have known that was the meaning. "Evelina, lovely to see you again," Davin said politely before introducing Kiera. "This is Kiera O'Neill." Evelina's gaze skimmed past her with a dismissive, Water will do for now." Kiera might have amused or insulted, but a millennium's worth of fireworks were going off inside her at the sight of Valentina Casal. Every motion possible whistled and burst in her ears, while sparks and flashes of color exploded in her vision. He hadn't bothered with a suit. He wore ripped jeans and a black shirt open at the throat. They clung to a frame that was every bit as athletically lean and flawless as it had been 3 years ago. His hair was still tousled, his jaw still in need of a shave. His gaze was exactly as piercing and unsettling. His silvery irises, enduringly familiar, pinned onto her, unwavering and fierce. It sounds like it's about to go down. Adrenaline urged her to run for her life, but the sting was laced with a bizarre excitement and urge to run for life. Between those imperatives sat a mixture of more complex emotions, carnivorous guilt and angry resentment, and something like painful relief. She had dreaded and anticipated the day from the moment she had agreed to Nico's offer to live with him. She would finally confront Val about their daughter. She had braced for whatever consequences that might produce, but she hadn't braced for the effect Val still had on her. I don't know. They sound like, this family sound like they're a piece of work. But, I guess that comes with the territory. Okay. Profound attraction accosted her. She shouldn't be surprised. The first time she seen him, he caused a stab of irresistible fascination in her. Time had stopped and her blood had sizzled as she had begun caressing the lines of his face in velvety shades of charcoal. That same sensual yank took hold of her today, but stronger. It was deeper, immediate, and sexual. Sexual? Not simply a compulsion to study and recreate him on a page, but a gut-deep desire to close the distance and touch him. She wanted to fill him with her entire body and bask in the fire he lit inside her. She wanted to feel the sweep of his hands down her naked back and his strong grip on her hips. Her body heated and tingled and grew aroused simply by standing in a room with him, because she knew what making love with him felt like. She knew how he could make her feel animalistic and alluring and good. When was the last time a man made you feel that way? He hadn't calculated the effect of their connection through their child either. She had spent over 2 years living with his father and his daughter. She knew so much more about Val Casal now, yet she still didn't know him. Her brief crush and the memory of a sweet encounter had become a spellbinding enthrallment with someone who had had a profound effect on her life. Despite the things she'd been told about him, however, and despite the fact he'd utterly